Welcome to the Inside Source Executive Video Series. With me today is Dr. Philip Hadcroft, and I'm so excited to have you here today. I've heard you speak twice now, once in Australia and then today at our summit. The amount of information you know about China in particular is staggering. So can you give me a little bit about your background and how did you ever gain this much information?
Just accumulating it through experience. I think that I have been working in the outsourced business services industry since 1988. So I'm one of those people that's been in it for a long time. I started it in Australia and very quickly found myself working for a large corporation that was majority owned by Eastman Kodak. Eastman Kodak brought me over to Rochester in the US to help them to develop strategies for outsourced business services. And they were interested in replicating their Australian model in other parts of the world. So I went with them into China and Southeast Asia and the UK. And beyond Eastman Kodak, I found it's the Chinese government from time to time that keeps inviting me back. So I've had the opportunity to speak at universities and help to build workshops and do a whole raft of business in China over many years. So it's accumulated knowledge, I guess.
Well, it's amazing, and I love listening to you talk about it. But so you explained, it wasn't that long ago, maybe as recently as 2006, that we would have referred to China as a manufacturing outsourced destination. But now, from everything I'm hearing from you, it's actually going to be a services outsourcing destination that will have amazing fortitude in not too many years.
Yeah, indeed. China's got a strategy for changing the emphasis in terms of the fundamental economic underpinnings of its economy. It spent 20 years building itself up as the outsourced manufacturing center of the world and the low-cost manufacturing destination. But from 2000 onwards, really, it's been trying to change the emphasis so that services becomes the primary driver of its economy. In the plan from 2006 that you refer to, they introduced the 10, 100, 1000 plan, which was specifically to drive 10 cities, 100 foreign national companies, and 1,000 Chinese companies to reorganize themselves to become the fundamental economic drivers of Chinese services industry. And they actually overshot the mark. It was a 5-year plan which finished in 2010. And by 2010, instead of 10 cities, they had 21 cities who were actively driving the services economy. So it's being driven hard, and it's being driven through policy, and it's very, very popularly supported in China as well.
So you mentioned previously, and I know we've had the conversation, that as long ago or early ago as 1980, China's GDP as a percentage of the United States was 7.3%. Now there's talk that in 10 to 20 years they could actually overtake the United States. So what's going to fuel that growth, and is it even possible?
Yeah, China is on the trajectory so that over the last 30 years they've moved from 7.26% to 52.6%. And that's a very, very strong growth. That's 52.6% of the US economy. Now, yes, could they overtake? If we do nothing more and they continue on this trajectory, certainly that's quite possible. The timeline appears to have been retarded slightly because of the GFC. So they would have been on track to do that by around 2020, other than the GFC. Now it's looking more like it'll be around 2025. Yes, they're on track to do that. What will fuel that is their drive, their very, very significant drive into the services economy. And as can only really happen in China, they have 1,000 or so mid-sized organizations that they wish to significantly grow in scale. And they're going to force that growth by outsourcing government contracts to them. And I have first-hand knowledge of the outsourcing of a government contract from a major Chinese bank to what was a small to medium-sized organization that finds, as a result of one contract for one service with one bank, it must now triple the size of its company inside 2 years.
Oh my goodness.
Right. So this is happening. It's been happening for about 18 months now, and it will continue to happen for the rest of this 5-year plan period.
So if they continue to funnel this kind of money from the government into these type of contracts, in a few years they're going to have enough experience and have the size and breadth to take on some U.S. firms?
That's the idea, that they should be globally competitive firms within 5 years. Whether they can achieve that will depend to a certain extent on whether or not they can actually bring the services resources into China that they need to do that, to fuel that growth. Almost in parallel to the way in which they've had to bring in iron ore and coal in order to develop their infrastructure, They need to bring in significant skills that are present in China but not there in sufficient volume and quantity to be able to cope with the growth that they're forcing.
But they don't need people. They have the bodies. So what kind of skills are they going to bring in?
Okay, it's not people in terms of arms and legs at an operational level, but it's managerial expertise. It's knowledge in how to lead organizations of the size and magnitude that haven't existed in China before. It's particular knowledge about domains. It's knowledge about vertical markets. It's knowledge about particular applications so that companies can start to cross-sell across multiple applications. It's knowledge of corporate governance and its leadership. Now, these things do exist in China, but they exist at a level which is not sufficient for the volume of growth that China demands. So they're looking to the US and the UK and Australia and Western Europe to provide the intellectual resources that they will need to be able to grow this industry.
So 4 other major outsourcing service areas, India, we have Latin America, Mexico, we have Philippines, we have Eastern Europe. None of them seem to be sustaining the type of growth as China. Do you see them as threats, or is there any reason why any of them couldn't do what China's doing?
Okay, let's just isolate the Philippines for a moment, because the Philippines has been doing something really quite exceptional at the same time. Focused in a sub-discipline of outsourcing, specifically in business process outsourcing. The Philippines already has more workers in that space than any other country in the world. So they surpassed India in 2009, and now they are the leading country in the world in BPO. So the Philippines is doing in its microcosm what China is doing more broadly in terms of services outsourcing. However, in terms of creating this very substantial threat, if you like, in terms of the competitive position of nations, the main contenders will always be the USA and China. Do I think that any of the nations could actually provide that level of growth that China is exhibiting? Not really. And there are a couple of reasons. One is that for 30 years now, China has been able to show compound annual growth in its GDP of over 11%. And as a consequence, it's accumulated significant wealth over a very prolonged period. So it has that resource, that very strong resource, which it can now spend on transforming its nation's economic underpinnings. Not many other countries have that wealth to fall back on. The other is the sheer scale and size of China. So the other countries that you've spoken of that are strong in outsourcing really don't have that size and scale that China has either. But the other clear component is the political mandate, that China is a single-party state, and if you're in that environment, then you can rely upon your party remaining in government in perpetuity. So you don't have the concerns that exist in a democratic society where you may not be elected in next time, or you may need to make decisions which are electorally popular. And in China, they make decisions based upon what's good for the country. They execute those decisions irrespective of popular feedback. And as a consequence, they can plan for a much longer term and execute plans over a 20-year period, which in the West we tend to find more difficult. It's not that we can't do it. We've shown in the past that we can do it, but for us, it's more the exception. And China is showing over the last 20 years that this is more their norm.
So for a company to be successful out of China right now, to do services outsourcing in particular, we're not going to have the cultural affinity in the West as we would with a Latin American or South American country. Are U.S. companies or U.S.-based companies or even European companies expected to become more Eastern in their culture, or do we expect them to become more Westernized in their dealings with us?
I think that's actually a commercial decision. The truth is, it's a matter of which markets those companies are trying to serve. So if the US company is trying to serve the US domestic market through its services, then it needs to have a culture which has affinity with the US market. But many US corporations are multinational and global corporations.
Exactly.
So a US corporation which is establishing its head office operations, say in Beijing or Shanghai, the intention of which is to serve the 1.3 billion people in China, it doesn't need to have necessarily an affinity with the US in order to do that. It simply has to have an affinity with the market it intends to serve.
Perfect. Okay, so PhD in BPO.
Right.
You have the very first one that's ever been awarded in the world that we know of.
So I understand, that's right.
So Is that more common? Do people find that course of study today? And how did you get this?
Well, the answer to the first part of your question really is that people are certainly doing a lot more in terms of formal training and formal study in subjects associated with BPO and outsourcing and sourcing more generally. It is absolutely becoming something that is attracting an awful lot of academic attention. Right now, it's very much heavily at the vocational training level, and there are a number of tertiary institutions that are offering courses at the graduate certificate, graduate diploma level. I'm active in trying to get universities to offer master's degrees which specialize in this space, but right now they're still quite a rarity. In terms of PhDs, I think PhDs around the world are always focused on the faculties from which they're drawn. So whether it's the Faculty of Commerce or the Faculty of Engineering or the Faculty of Business, PhDs tend to come from those faculties, but the candidates themselves elect to focus their research in particular areas. So it will be down to individual candidates to focus on outsourcing related topics. And yes, mine, I believe, and I understand, was the first of its kind, but I'm sure it won't be the last.
No, I hope not. I hope not. So you have a book, The Big Red Book of Outsourcing.
Right.
And it's a great resource, an amazing resource. I've been telling everybody they have to get it. You just can't go to China and do business without it. Do you think you have plans, or would you like to have plans to do this for other regions of the world, or are you going to stay just focused on China alone?
No, actually, I've already started scoping exercises for a couple of smaller governments. One was Malta, one was Taiwan, and these are smaller governments where they're looking to let the world understand the nature of the infrastructure that they can bring to bear. So those scoping studies have been done. It's up to those governments now to determine whether they want that to proceed to full-blown research, but that's highly likely. In regards to the USA, we have done the preliminary work for a scoping study looking at the international investment promotional arms of all of the states of the USA, written out to them all, and getting some response, some encouraging response from states like North Dakota, Arizona, South Dakota, Tennessee, Kentucky. But many of the other states have not yet recognized the need for this to become a government initiative. I think most states seem to be relying upon individual companies to drive the change into a services economy, whereas some states are recognizing that they can make a difference by driving rather than simply allowing the change to happen.
I certainly hope that they pay attention and start getting on the bandwagon. So with that, we're out of time, but
Sure.
As I've told you before, I could sit here and just talk to you and just try and learn anything I can from you. You're just an amazing wealth of information. I appreciate you flying all the way over from Australia. I appreciate you spending time with our group, and I know we have so many questions that people want to get to you with. So
Thank you so much for the invitation to be here.
Thank you.
It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you. This is Dawn Evans from Sourcing Interest Group, and join us next time for our video series.